Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depends on where you are in this globally connected digital post-pandemic or ongoing pandemic era. My name is Uzair Yunus. I am director of the Pakistan Initiative at Atlantic Council South Asia Center. And today we're going to be having a detailed conversation about the transformative potential of crypto and blockchain for Pakistan. Many of you who are tuning in today have heard about FOMO, hodling, crypto booms, speculative activity, etc. But really, the goal of this conversation today is to declutter this space and understand how the internet, how money, and how we interact with money and the internet economy is changing in front of our very eyes. From my point of view, this is an opportunity for Pakistan and many other countries around the world to leapfrog ahead, to take advantage of what is going on all over the world in terms of innovation. And that's really what the focus of the Pakistan Initiative at the Atlantic Council is. We want to have conversations like this, privately, publicly, publish research on topics like this that help policymakers, people in Pakistan, outside Pakistan, people here in Washington, D.C., and beyond understand what's going on in the country and have a conversation around what can Pakistan do to take advantage of these transformative opportunities that are unleashing their true potential in front of our very eyes. Joining me today is an amazing panel. I'll let my dear friend and moderator of this discussion, Kulsum Lakhani, kick things off. Many of you already know Kulsum, but just in terms of her bio, Kulsum is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council South Asia Center, and she's also co-founder and general partner at I2I Ventures, which is an early stage VC fund for Pakistan and the country's first female-founded VC fund. Prior to opening doors at I2I Ventures, Kulsum was the founder of Invest to Innovate, which is its sister entity. This was founded in 2011 to support and unleash the potential of young entrepreneurs in Pakistan. And I remember in 2016, when I first moved to DC, Kulsum and I met and we exchanged ideas on those early days of Pakistan startup ecosystem. And we've come a long, long way with Pakistani startups raising more money just this year alone than the last few years combined. So these are exciting times. And so we're looking forward to this and many more such conversations. And with that, Kulsum, over to you to kick us off on this discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Ozair, for that super kind intro. And thank you so much to the Atlantic Council and specifically the South Asia Center for organizing this really exciting topic. I'm super excited to dig in with this amazing panel that we have today. So I'm just going to set a little bit of the framing for everyone in the audience and also want to assume that people have knowledge of crypto, but maybe not everyone does. So we want to try to avoid some of the buzzwords that sometimes come up, and I'll try to make sure we distill as much as this as possible. So as Ozair was mentioning, obviously we've seen, all these things take off. Everyone's been talking about Bitcoin and Ethereum for a really long time, but really in the pandemic, we've seen so much of this take off. And actually, during the pandemic, we saw a total, just recently, actually, cryptocurrency exceeded $2 trillion in market cap recently. So it's safe to say that this is not something that's just a blip. It's not going away. This is the future of what we're experiencing today. And then in Pakistan, Chainalysis recently ranked the country third in terms of adoption on the 2021 Global Crypto Adoption Index. So we know that despite some of the regulatory barriers that exist in Pakistan in this space, there are an enormous number of users in Pakistan investing in crypto, engaging in the blockchain, people who are really interested in this space. What we've often seen even globally is that country regulations have actually been slow to catch up with this space, but some countries are more friendly than others, while others are more hostile. So really in Pakistan right now, given where we are in terms of adoption, the amount of interest in everything, we're really kind of at an inflection point of where regulations can open up the opportunity further or can actually act as a barrier for this growth. So what we've also yet to see actually a native crypto exchange or brokerage even exist in Pakistan, unlike in other countries. So in India, we've actually even seen players like WizirX, CoinDCX, CoinSwitch, Kuber all became unicorns in India. And so we know that the opportunity and the landscape is actually ripe for disruption right now in Pakistan. So really exciting time to have this conversation. Really excited to have my panelists here today. The topic that we have is what is the potential for blockchain and crypto in Pakistan. We'll be diving in with Omar Suleiman, Salahuddin Khwaja, Ali Farid Khwaja are going to be our speakers today. And actually, what's really interesting is that if you've read their bios on our website, there isn't really much of a mention of their linkage to crypto per se. So what I would really love to do is first allow our panelists to introduce themselves, but also talk about, what was their journey into crypto and where are they now? So maybe what we can do is start with Salahuddin, a good friend of mine. Maybe just give a quick intro to yourself, but also what was that journey for you? I think all of us have had that rabbit hole moment with crypto and blockchain. So would love to hear from you. And then we'll turn it over to Omar and then Ali.
Yeah, Kulsum, happy to do this. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Salahuddin. I spent 20 years on Wall Street. I initially did 10 years at Deloitte as a management consultant, helping companies like MasterCard and Citibank with digital transformation. And then I spent 5 years at JP Morgan and 5 years at Bank of America. Similar themes around digital transformation. I have an undergrad in computer science. And I think between that and my experience at MasterCard, I connected the dots on Bitcoin early. In 2014, I started investing in Bitcoin, and then shortly after in Ethereum. For me, I think the aha moment then was if you have a technology that can maintain a ledger, you don't need a MasterCard, you don't need a bank. And for me, so I was thinking, hey, MasterCard's market caps, yay. Bank of America, JP Morgan, crazy market caps, huge companies, financial sector is huge. Hey, you know what? This technology can potentially disrupt, banking. And so I kind of rode the wave initially. I think in 2017, 2018, I took my eye off the ball where, it was an early garage project, right? It was kind of, if you think about, 14.4 modem, right? Early 90s internet. And the use cases weren't there, right? So the big knock on, crypto, blockchain, Bitcoin was, hey, you know what? It's a great tech looking for a problem to solve. And that was very much so true until maybe I would say 2 years ago, coming out of, the crypto winter, you could see the use cases, DeFi, metaverse, ed tech, etc. And it's way, way more than just a currency, which I think people don't get. And I think that's going to be a fascinating topic that we should definitely explore in this conversation. And so for me, over the last year, having left Wall Street, having the mind space, to kind of go deeper into crypto and its potential, I was like, oh, wow, this is the right time. This is kind of 99, 2000. And, the next 20 years are going to be all about crypto projects, Web3, et cetera. So that's a bit about me and how I'm way deep into the crypto rabbit hole.
Yeah, and you actually just moved back to Pakistan. And so that we'll get deeper into that too, in terms of the use cases there, because I think it's super exciting. I'm going to turn it over to Omar to give an intro to yourself and your aha moment when it came to this space.
Hi, my name is Omar Suleiman, and I am one of the founders of Westridge Markets, which is a proprietary trading and venture investment firm, which is focused on the crypto ecosystem. So I would describe myself more recently as a serial entrepreneur in the crypto space. Since Westridge, along with my two partners, we set up a firm in the asset management space. It's called OX1 Research, which looks into asset management in the crypto space, again, based out of London, regulated by the FCA. And most recently, and I think I should say the thing that we've been most excited about recently is a technology firm called Haruko. Again, the three of us set it up, and it's meant to be a one-stop shop between institutional capital and the crypto ecosystem. So that's sort of my background in crypto. But prior to that, I spent a good part of the last 2 decades trading financial derivatives for leading Wall Street firms, including Citi and Goldman Sachs. And before that, I was finishing off my graduate studies in applied maths and physics at Oxford. So that sort of that was sort of a background for me. So in terms of where I came into crypto from, I think it's very much from that trading background, trading derivatives in particular. So we started looking at crypto about 4 years ago. I should say, kind of, it's different from, as Salahuddin said, it's different aha moment for me, because I never really looked at the technology or thought of it as the decentralized ledger and all those things. So the first thing was, it was a market which was moving a lot, so there was a lot of volatility, and we had trading backgrounds, and we set up a firm to monetize that volatility in a trading sense. So that was sort of our main foray. But then over those 4 years, really having that technology and quantitative DNA, we started looking at the technology a lot more sort of deeply, and kind of, all those things that you hear from sometimes from policymakers, but also, famous individuals, and you kind of, crypto native individuals somewhat cringe at, things like JP Morgan's effort at a private blockchain, and things like people saying, oh, blockchain is fine but crypto is useless, and sort of not understanding that it's the combination of the computer engineering, cryptography, and game theory that come together, and without this coin incentivization structure, there is no blockchain. So we went through all those things and understood them at deeper and deeper levels, and we feel like now we're in sort of pretty in the thick of things, and feel very, very optimistic that the next 20 years are going to be game changing, just like the invention of internet was game changing. And it took like good 10 years before internet came from its academic roots to be something that commercial enterprises could be built on. And I think those 10 years for crypto now have passed, and we're really at the cusp of building out some real applications in this space.
That's exciting. So you're pretty deep in your rabbit hole right now. So Ali, what about you? Would love to hear from you.
Oh, thank you for asking that question, especially, and also for pointing out that in our bios, blockchain doesn't appear that much, and that's very interesting point which you raised, and I would love to talk about more about this later on. So I run K-Trade, which is a stock brokerage and investment bank in Pakistan, and so it's like Robinhood, an app through which people and institutions can invest in stocks, and it's a regulated company. And before that, for the last 17 years, I've worked as a tech analyst, investor, and operator in London. So my journey with blockchain and Bitcoin started in 2013 when I wrote a report. I was a sell-side analyst covering tech, and I wrote a report on Bitcoin, and I think it was one of the earlier reports on the topic. And then later on, when I was at SafeCharge, which was one of the largest payment processing companies in the UK, a lot of crypto companies used to approach us to integrate with us. Companies like BitPay and some of the large crypto companies. But back then, accepting Bitcoin as a payment method was not really mainstream because of the volatility. And the speeds were so low compared to Visa and MasterCard that at least in the traditional payment sector, they thought that there's no real use case for this technology. And later on, I became a consultant for Stacks. It used to be called Blockstack, a US-based company run by a friend. And now I'm setting up a crypto trading company in Dubai. I have a technology company which is making smart contracts on Stacks on Bitcoin, and I'm consulting with the bank in Liechtenstein on helping them become crypto friendly.
Awesome.
But on the point on and I think this is the topic of the discussion today as well. When I set up a company in Pakistan, and I registered it with SECP, and the name of the company is BlockTech. So SECP made me do an undertaking that this company will not do anything in blockchain and will not offer any coins to anybody. So that's how restrictive or paranoid or scared they were, at least back then, about it.
Yeah. And let's dive into that a little bit more in a bit. But actually, just for people in the audience, the Manib that Ali was mentioning is someone who's Pakistani, who's based in the US, that set up Stacks. And it's really about building smart contracts off Bitcoin, which is really exciting stuff. And for those who don't know the difference, Bitcoin obviously mostly used for transactions. So the fact that you can do smart contracts is a really exciting thing that they've been building out. So we want to be sure. I know there's a lot of buzzwords roaming around here. So feel free to ask. There's no such thing as a stupid question. Trust me, I've asked many stupid questions in my own learning journey, and I will continue to. So feel free to ask questions in the chat for our panelists. And as we dive into this, You can either put it in the Q&A box or in the chat itself. We'll try to get to it. I also posted on Twitter yesterday about this panel, so got a lot of really great questions that we're going to try to dig into today. So let's first kind of dig into Pakistan and like the actual users, right? So as I mentioned earlier, Chain Analysis recently ranked Pakistan third in terms of adoption on the 2021 Global Crypto Adoption Index. I think Salahuddin, you just shared something like a few hours ago that we're number 5 on another list. Then it was also, Ali, you actually mentioned in a piece that you wrote that Binance is the 4th most downloaded app in Pakistan, which it doesn't necessarily mean that we're the 4th biggest user on Binance, but it is really interesting in terms of just the amount of interest. As I was preparing for this panel yesterday, I kind of went down a little bit of a YouTube rabbit hole, and there are so many influencers that are Pakistani that are talking about, how can people access crypto? How can they buy into crypto? So there's a lot of quote unquote influencers that have definitely come up. So I would love to kind of help us go beyond the numbers and the rankings, right? Let's distill who are these users. And so would love to maybe talk to Omar first, because I know that you have a bit of a contrarian view about the rankings themselves, but would love to kind of dive in for all of you guys. Who are the users? What are the user personas? The people that are really, really excited about this right now, and the thousands of people, millions of people, whatever that number is of how many people are actually buying into crypto right now, and how are they mostly interacting, whether it's crypto or on the blockchain itself. So maybe let's start with Omar, and then let's go to Ali, and then Salahuddin.
Sure. So, I'm sure Ali, in particular, being involved in the retail space in Pakistan and investing, would have a lot more views to share on this. But I think one point to make, and I know it's big numbers generally excite people and they're good to have, but the ranking, Chain Analysis ranking that's frequently mentioned takes into account sort of a measure of quote unquote GDP per capita of the country. So it's Pakistan being third on that list of adoption is it has to be taken with a pinch of salt, because it doesn't mean that bulk of the actual dollars, or it's not a ranking of dollars. It's very much sort of adjusted for that thing. So that's something that I'd like to sort of just highlight, and I think it's just it doesn't make me any less enthusiastic about what this can do in Pakistan, but it's at the same time kind of we should understand that realistically we're very, very early in this journey. In terms of my views on this, I'd say that crypto is a space which is, because it's built in public, so something like Apple, for example, wasn't built in public. So largely what happens is that the real value of the companies or enterprises or whatever become a lot more while the prices kind of follow. So, Apple share price, people realize much later that how big something is being built inside a corporate, for example. But in crypto space, because everything is built in public, almost like the euphoria is not following the value. It's kind of, it's actually front running the value. So prices are great indicators, or, adoption or, buying of crypto is great indicator. Most people who will purchase crypto in that sense have no real understanding of what this is, what it's doing. It's just the access to an investment possibility, which is clearly open, clearly very inclusive. And so it's a great way for people to get involved. And I think the real fun really begins once people get comfortable with holding crypto. And then, you can get into the foray of Web3, smart contracts, the utilities, whether it's gaming, NFTs, all of those that we can talk about. I think that's where the real action is once people are holding crypto and are happy to hold crypto.
Fair point. Ali, what do you think?
Everybody is investing in crypto in Pakistan in terms of the persona.
So, like, who is that early adopter? Let's dive into that. What's that persona like?
So we come across them all the time. Because like as part of K-Trade, we do road shows all across Pakistan, even in tier 2, tier 3 cities. And we talk to all kinds of personas of people, the most rich people, and like the normal guy, and the shopkeeper, students. And I would say that right now, in terms of the adoption, it is all kinds of personas. So literally we go to tier 3 cities and they're shopkeepers, and they would say, oh, tell me about Shiba Inu. we'll be talking to the richest people in Pakistan, and they will also have, they wouldn't want to talk about stocks. They would want to talk about either politics, how bad that is, or they would want to talk about how crypto, which is the best crypto coin to buy. So it is, I totally, I get the point which Umar is making, but I think in terms of numbers, I read somewhere that, we are talking about 15 to 20 million people in Pakistan, which are investing in crypto through various platforms. So it's very broad-based, it's very pervasive, it has penetrated tier 2, tier 3 cities. In fact, perhaps I would reckon that adoption is actually higher adjusted for population, it's actually higher in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, because this is the only option of investment or speculation or becoming rich which these people have. And if you overlay this with the macro uncertainty and rising inflation and deterioration in the value of rupee, people think that this is the only way, or this is a way through which they can become rich.
That's a really good point, especially about the tier 2, tier 3 cities and that use case. Salahuddin, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, let me connect the dots with what Umar was saying. Spot on the number 3. You got to take it with a grain of salt. It's also weighted heavily towards P2P transactions, which in the US, as an example, there's not a lot of P2P transactions. So, but again, I totally agree with him that doesn't make me less enthusiastic. And then connecting it with Ali, I feel the same. When you talk to people across a broad spectrum of different stratas in Pakistan, everyone's interested. A lot of it's obviously speculative in nature, FOMO, etc. And that kind of plays out. I'm more of a techie and a kind of a true believer in the tech itself. And the more people you kind of get into the network effect takes shape, right? I'm not a big fan of what's called shit coins like Shiba Inu and Doge, right? But yeah. What's interesting is that the use case comes after. So there's no use case, but if you have 1 million people in your community, guess what? You're going to monetize it, right? And so I think the more people come in, and if you have 15 people on this network, if you will, guess what? There's going to be a ton of ways to monetize it. I see 2 really interesting use cases that are beyond the speculative nature, which gives me kind of like a sense that, hey, this is going to be huge in Pakistan also. One is just if you think about like the freelance community and you think about remittances, right? And connecting the payment side to things. It takes me sometimes 5 days to 10 days to send a new wire from my Bank of America account to Pakistan, forever, right? All I need is Ali's wallet address, and guess what? In seconds, he has money that I can send to him. Now, obviously, there's issues with on-ramps and off-ramps and KYC and blah, 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 and that gets sorted kind of along the way. So that's one use case. And the second one is something that we have a project on, which is around the whole virtual gaming on blockchain, the play-to-earn space. So you play Axie Infinity and you can make 1,000 rupees a day. All you need to know is how to use a smartphone, right? So you can be interpass, if you will, right? And guess what? You're earning a decent, living, decent wage, and you can scale from there. And so those are the 2 cases that are of interest to me.
Yeah. And I mean, you skipped ahead some, but maybe we can actually just talk about the use cases right now when we think about the potential for Web3 when it comes to Pakistan, because I think we're just literally scratching the surface when we think about people owning crypto, right? I mean, that's literally just the beginning of your crypto journey or your journey within DeFi, decentralized finance, right? So let's dig a little bit deeper into that. And so Salahuddin, a lot of people may not know what play to earn means, right? And there's also beyond play to earn, there's play to learn. There's like all these other use cases that we can think about. So, those are the 2 that you're the most excited about. Can you distill a little bit more for the audience what play to earn means and what that potential looks like? And even in terms of what that means for democratizing wealth in markets like Pakistan.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people are going to be familiar with the game called Roblox. They'll have, young cousins, nephews, nieces that play this game called Roblox. Roblox is a traditional game. It was a private company, went public, right? And it has its own currency. So that's kind of one path. What if there was another path where you built a game on a blockchain? And guess what? It's got a native currency. It's got a native token. And so if there's a way to gamify it, right? And you start making money when you play, when you fight, when you play these challenges, and then you can scale. So you have to buy some NFTs to play the game. So there's a capital hurdle, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where guilds come in. And so I've been talking to a few people. I'm thinking about how we can build a guild in Pakistan where you're basically connecting investors with players.
I'm going to keep stopping you on the buzzwords. Tell people what a guild is.
Okay, it's just a fancy way to say a group of people.
Yes.
That's it.
Basically,
right?
if anyone's played Dungeons and Dragons, those are also called guilds, like the teams of people. Go ahead.
Yeah, you got it. And the thing of it is just like a marketplace or an entity, right? That's connecting investors on one side and it's connecting players on the other. And you can build a community. And so I do a lot of ed tech work. So my thinking was, hey, in the morning they play games and in the afternoon they go learn Python. And hey, you know what? You change everything. And I think connecting the dots with kind of, Web3, right? More broadly, there's this kind of a thesis that I have that you need to go crypto first today. And what does that mean? Take the analogy of 10 years ago, 12 years ago, prescient companies, prescient leaders went mobile first, right? And so today you got to go crypto or Web3 first. And it doesn't mean just the currency. It means how does the token play into whatever product you're building? Like take K-Trade, right? If there's a token there and I'm getting a token back, guess what? I'm going to trade more. So how does that play into that strategy? And you think about it that way. And that's where I think there's a broader play in Pakistan where, one thing we have an abundance of is people. So why can't we train 1 million people on blockchain and Web3? User experience, right? Programmers, both front end, back end, blockchain, etc. And guess what? All the world is shifting here to Web3, and we have this pool of resources. That's going to be like foreign direct income coming right into Pakistan, and we can ride that wave. And so that for me is like, hey, you know what? We got to get people to get focused on that.
And we actually have a really great question in here on the note of the potential or the use cases around this when it comes to financial services. And I'm going to throw this to Ali and to Omar. Arusha asked in the audience, hi, Arusha, she's always really smart on this stuff on Twitter. What's the potential of blockchain in the financial services of Pakistan, especially banking? Ripple had a good value case pertaining to remittances, to what Salahuddin was mentioning. However, Ripple is under review by SEC, and they didn't show much interest in the Pakistani market. Please let me know also if there's a forum where blockchain enthusiasts from Pakistan can join in. There is actually a few on the Launch community as well. But Ali and Omar, if you want to start tackling this question in terms of what are the use cases for blockchain in the financial services or any sector really when it comes to Pakistan.
So
maybe I can.
Yeah, go on.
Please go ahead.
Go on, Ali. I can go after.
Yeah, so I think the biggest pain point which Pakistan faces in the financial market, and this is not just unique to Pakistan, this is true for most frontier markets, is cross-border flow of money. How do you get, if you are a tech developer, how do you get paid? Like, I have a company in the UK, I live in UK, my company is in Pakistan. It's a nightmare for me to transfer money from UK. So it's not remittances. When people talk about remittances, they're usually thinking about B2C or C2C payments, like people sending money to their families, which of course is extremely important for Pakistan because we receive around $30 billion of inflows, which is the largest source of US dollars and foreign capital into Pakistan. But besides that, all kinds of business payments, a tech company trying to pay Amazon, it's very, very difficult. So blockchain has a massive use case in that. And I'll give you my example. I tried to transfer £50,000 from my bank account in the UK to the company in Pakistan, and the UK bank froze my bank account. They said, Pakistan is on a FATF grey list. You do the same thing using any kind of crypto exchange, USDT or any stable coin, and it happens within seconds. So it's a massive and central use case which solves a massive problem.
Great. Omar?
Yeah, I just add to that, I agree completely. I think the use case is obvious, and probably, in fact, if anything, the first use case that the inventor of Bitcoin envisaged, it wasn't a store of value. Actually, it was a peer-to-peer payment system that he envisaged. So it's the obvious and the sort of the most prominent use case. I think it's very much a policy driven issue. The fact that when I type into my bank account to send money somewhere and it takes like 7 days for it to arrive in the other country, it's not really the rails that is the problem. I think that is a policy related problem. There are lots of sort of middlemen in there, and those are protected by regulators, by law in both countries, and so on and so forth. So I think the technology is obvious and very straightforward, but the policy side of things can take a long time, and on ramps and off ramps on both sides will take a long time to build out. So I think that's the use case is very simple, but the work needs to be done on the policy side.
So that's actually a great tee up. Thanks for that, Omar. For the kind of digging into the regulatory side of things, right? So I think a lot of people, people think that crypto is banned in Pakistan, and that's actually not fully the case, right? It's not technically banned, but you can't use it as a means of payment. So it's really difficult for you to just buy crypto with your Pakistani credit card. But however, you can hold crypto and you can leverage Binance from a P2P perspective in order to be able to get crypto in the first place. So generally, I think there's a lot of confusion and question marks around the regulatory framework that I think represents an opportunity, right? And I think oftentimes when we've seen the gray area that happens, we oftentimes can see countries, in the case of China, go more towards being hostile towards crypto, or in the case of countries like Philippines, being very friendly towards crypto, right? And friendly towards the space altogether. So right now, the fact that Pakistan is kind of sitting in this interesting gray area represents an opportunity to hopefully go in the right direction. So maybe what we'll do is we'll start with Ali first. Would love to know, where are we now when it comes to the regulatory framework around blockchain and crypto in Pakistan? You had mentioned even with, when you set up your company, just generally what the SCCP was saying even back then. Are you seeing people being more friendly and open to things right now? Or what are the things that we need the considerations that regulators should make when they're building this framework, just, from the ground up?
Great question and difficult question. So the regulation generally is very anti-crypto. And in Pakistan, they deliberately keep things gray and complicated and confusing, because then they can do selective punishment, right? So if they come and start imposing the regulation in true spirit, then they can put you to jail. And otherwise, they'll let it. They won't do anything so that 15 million people are using it. So I'll give you examples of it. So there are three specific regulations. So first is offering access to an investment product to retail investors. Technically, all offshore platforms such as Binance are illegal because they're not regulated by SCCP. So they're not allowed to offer the services, but they do. So when you said you Google on the internet and you find influencers doing this, promoting crypto in local language, that can be considered as a breach of the regulation because you're promoting an investment product which is not regulated. So that's one. That comes under the ambit of SCCP, which is still, SCCP as a regulator is still pro or slightly more positive towards innovation. But then comes the bigger problem, which is Pakistan has capital controls. And this comes under State Bank. It comes under the foreign exchange regulation, FE manual, so Pakistanis are not allowed to send money outside for all of these activities. So when you said that, you can do peer-to-peer transfer to Binance, technically they can deem it as money laundering. And then it is, if you apply the rule, it is money laundering. So because essentially you are paying somebody and who's putting money on your behalf, so you are not coding your transaction, you're trying to hide that transaction and the regulator cannot see that transaction. So that means that if and whenever they want to apply that regulation, because it's money laundering, the implications of that can be very serious for anybody involved in it. Of course, they're not doing anything. So we all know that Pakistan has high crypto adoption rate, which means they're not doing anything. But that means that if, like for K-Trade, we are a regulated company, if we are seen to either promote crypto or engage in that has serious implications. So the regulation is actually deliberately, it is very anti-crypto. There's no action because they don't want to do anything. But if and when they do, it will be serious.
Omar, would you like to take this next? I'm just curious, I know, Ali, we've talked about this before. Are there working groups currently in place of people who are people that know a lot about the space, like yourself, like Salahuddin, that are actually having conversations with the regulators? I'm just curious, what does advocacy look like from your side, from the private sector, in terms of pushing a framework forward?
I'll just mention one story, I think, which will highlight this.
Yeah.
So, and as I said earlier, SCCP is quite pro blockchain and the use cases of blockchain. But it's not about SCCP. So I went to State Bank. I was talking to a senior guy over there. He said, we will just let SCCP handle it. And I was like that, that if you don't allow the outflow of money, then the whole industry cannot develop, right? Like, because we have a precedent with the commodity futures exchange. So Pakistan has a commodity futures exchange. It's called PEMEX, Pakistan Mercantile Exchange. There's hardly any volumes on it. Although theoretically you can buy gold, oil futures, US S&P futures, NASDAQ futures. There's no volume on it because State Bank does not allow you to send money out to get gold in or get oil in. So it's dormant. So State Bank was, so I said I when they said, oh, we'll allow SCCP to make regulations on it, I was like, and I know that if you don't do this, if you don't be flexible on FE regulation, then nothing will happen. So they said yes. And then the guy said that I don't see the benefit to Pakistan if people can invest in crypto. And I was like, okay, that's a tough first question to answer. But so I think you have two regulators. One is pro, but that SCCP being pro crypto or open to crypto means nothing unless State Bank becomes more flexible on the FE manual.
And okay. And so I'll let Omar and Salahuddin weigh in as well, because I think it's important to say, like, you can't just put it on one regulator. It has to be both of them in the room ultimately, right? Working together, because blockchain ultimately, that's great, but crypto is obviously under the purview of another regulator. So just curious, Omar and Salahuddin, if you guys have thoughts or comments on this, and what can we learn, Omar, as someone who's sitting in the UK, like what can we learn from other markets that have maybe more friendly policies of how we can actually engage the regulator maybe better?
Sure. Absolutely. So I think my first comment on the topic of regulators keeping it fairly vague. I mean, I agree with Ali on that. There could be external reasons for doing that, but also it's really, really, really difficult to understand the space for non-specialists. So I think your point about advocacy is extremely important in terms of educating the regulators and the people in charge. I would take a step back in terms of, obviously Ali's given two regulators about this. I would take a step back and actually talk about what is a cryptocurrency, because that helps us figure out who needs to regulate it and in what fashion. And this is also important because this is how most of the developed markets have actually, in the US, UK, and other places have approached this. Is first you need to figure out what is, say, Bitcoin, because again, I think in the cryptocurrencies, a cryptocurrency in some sense is like a company. And if I set up a company today, it bears no resemblance to an Apple or an Amazon, even though they're also a company. So kind of you need to understand that two cryptos are as far apart as the company that I register in half an hour right now versus Apple is same kind of difference. So I'd talk about something like Bitcoin and Ethereum first, and just we need to understand what is it, and then who needs to regulate it. So most of the Western countries have taken the view, and I'll come to it exactly how we kind of arrive at it, is that it's a commodity. So first, kind of, I guess I can think of it as three different things, a currency, a financial security, and a commodity. Now, it's not really a currency till you accept it as a legal tender anywhere. So while El Salvador's now done it, that's one country in the world, but truly it would only be a currency like a dollar or a Canadian dollar or a yen or something if you treat it like that. So technically you can't really treat it as a currency because you don't even accept it as a currency. Then the question will be, is it a security? Now, for something to be a security, it needs to be something that's of a centralized company. It's a share in a company, and there's all this insider regulation, all the trading regulations that apply to it because it's a security. Now, something like Bitcoin is completely decentralized. No central body has any more information than any outsiders, and so on and so forth. So on all of those tests, it fails. It's not a security. That leaves you with thinking, okay, what is it? And you are only left with a commodity. So it's, like a gold, or even I'd say like an oil or a bushel of wheat. It's just a commodity. It's a thing. In this case, it's just not a physical thing. It's just a virtual thing, but it's a thing. And the closest thing that it is to is a commodity. Now, so I think most of the Western world, and Singapore is a pretty good regulatory regime in this case, and I think there's a lot to learn from how Singapore is regulating crypto. I think it is treated as a commodity, and And separately, I just mentioned that, derivatives, so futures are derivatives on underlyings, and derivatives in most of these places are actually regulated. So derivatives on crypto, so crypto futures would count as regulated instruments. So if you're selling crypto futures to someone or crypto options to someone, that would be a regulated activity. But if you just sell Bitcoin to someone or buy Bitcoin from someone, that's not regulated. I mean, it is just like buying a car off someone, literally, or buying a lot of gold off someone. Not that people do that regularly. So I think that's an important thing, because that sets us up to figure out. And I think someone like Pakistan should, I think, come to the same conclusions. Now, there are some external factors, and I clearly understand the point about capital controls. And I think that might make you think, okay, it's a commodity, but once bought, it can effectively be exported out of the country without anything stopping it. And that's a problem. Like, if you bought gold in Pakistan, that's fine, but then you can't easily send that gold outside without going through customs and so on and so forth. So Bitcoin can actually leave the country. So there could be capital controls issues. But I think you still need to start with that. Crypto is a commodity. I think that creates a lot of sort of base groundwork for how it is. And I'll just make one more point quickly, is that you can actually acquire crypto through, obviously, mining, which is an entire different world, where mining and Bitcoin can actually help you regulate your electricity grids, because miners are very sort of quick loads to come on and off and so on. So there's mining, and then as Salahuddin explained and touched on, play to earn, for example, is an example of how crypto can get created. So there's a ton of opportunity, and that's what the open ecosystem does, is that a place like Pakistan, for example, you don't have to have centralized exchanges as the starting point of the ecosystem. And also, you mentioned that exchanges generally, centralized exchanges like WazirX, for example, form the sort of cornerstone or the starting gambit in a way, but they don't have to. So you could enter the ecosystem really from a mining, play to earn, from a work value perspective, such that crypto will be created inside the country. Right. And then, potentially if it leaves, but, there's definitely a wealth that's being created inside the country. And I think that makes the regulatory process a lot more interesting and useful. But I think the starting point is you need to
as well.
Sorry?
Easier to digest as well, right?
Absolutely, easier to digest as well. But I think the starting point is you need to think of it as a commodity. I think that solves a lot of problems, and then figure out what's next.
And that's super interesting. Salahuddin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I got a few thoughts here. So let me start with the number, $42 trillion. That's how big this is going to be over the next 10 years. And this is based off of, very conservative estimates, right? I agree with a lot of what Ali said in terms of the regulatory issues today. What Omar said, that, hey, the starting point is commodity. But I actually have a different view. I think it's a brand new asset class, and it's different asset classes. Because if you think of play to earn, is it a commodity? Is it not? You think about NFTs, right? A different type, like, do you want to regulate art? I don't know. And so what's happening here in the US, as an example, I'm visiting right now, you've got CFTC that does commodities. You got FRB, that's the monetary system. You got OCC that does currency. Then you've got the FDIC that does insurance. There's all sorts of regulatory bodies, and right now they're tripping over each other. There needs to be this kind of connected overarching strategy. And, unfortunately for me, I spent, the last 10, 12 years at post 2008 doing a lot of regulatory projects. And I think regulation is very, very important, and it's welcomed. Smart regulation is something necessary. It legitimizes the space, and the whole on-ramps, off-ramps, KYC, AML, it's absolutely necessary. But I think that the space is moving so fast, the regulators, it's impossible to keep up. And Omar touched upon this, right? Where you need smart people who get this to be regulating this. And the Ali point about the banker saying what he was saying, like the state banker, I mean, it's just ridiculous. They just don't get it. And if you want to take advantage of this $42 trillion opportunity, imagine the foreign income, the effects that's going to come in. Now, you can take this view, hey, you know what, I'm going to create a walled garden around Pakistan, and you can question how big of a garden Pakistan is, right? You want to open this up, and you want to do it smartly, that there is, like, let's say, Bitcoin coming into the economy, and then, hey, let people hang out over there, right? So nothing's going out, and you can put the controls on it. You can be very smart. You can have regulated apps, like just regulated banking, right? You know exactly what's going on a ledger, and guess what? All the money that's hidden away in plots or under your mattress, if it comes into this, It's all digitized. So it's actually like if the PTI government's listening, it's going to be a boon on the FX issues that's happening right now. But you got to be smart about it, and I think that's the biggest challenge.
Well, I think, and I think that's a really great point, is that smart regulation is actually super important. But there's also just generally, I think what we tend to witness is there's a lot of, I think sometimes founded fears, but fears around like, what could people be using it for, nefarious reasons. There's a great question in here, and I'd love to just throw it to you guys because we get asked this all the time, right? Of, Mariam Arif says the Capitol insurrection in Washington, D.C. was funded in part by cryptocurrency. How do we ensure crypto is not misused by corrupt actors and terrorists in Pakistan? And even to, Ali's point earlier about, money laundering and things like that, obviously it's things being seen a certain way. So maybe would love to hear how you guys.
Can I?
Yeah, please.
Can I take that? Listen, I don't know Mariam from Eve or Adam, but that's not the right question. And right. I'll tell you why. Because nefarious activity happens with paper currency. Sure. Nefarious activity happens in banking, right? And if you think about it broadly, right, the UN says there's like $2 to $4 trillion of illicit activity happening. How much of that's on Bitcoin? It's not that much. MIT research, other research shows this. So this is kind of the same thing that people say, oh my God, Bitcoin's not green, right? It emits carbon. When you work at a bank, when you bank at a bank, guess what? You're emitting carbon. When you take a plane, you're emitting carbon. So these questions are like interesting questions, and maybe kind of like at a place where when you're kind of getting into crypto, you want to ask these questions, but the space is way bigger than this. And it's kind of the glass half full, glass half empty, right? And this, I think this is a message to the regulators if they're listening, or the government folks, right? You can look at this glass half empty and be the negative person, right? And you know what? Pakistan's going to miss this opportunity.
Right.
And that's what I fear, right? Versus, hey, there's this massive wave coming, right? Web3, crypto, etc. How do you smartly allow us to kind of, ride that wave?
So let's assume the regulators are listening. And so Omar and Ali, what would you guys say to those? That's typically something that I hear the most often, right? Is this fear around, to Salahuddin's point, it's not the right question, but it is something that is a question that gets asked. And, to that point, it is valid because people say it all the time. So what would you respond? And let's assume they're listening.
I'm less hopeful because I'm less hopeful and less optimistic about Pakistani regulators. And the regulators, so this, I had the hope of smart regulation. I wrote an article on it as well. But interacting with the regulator, it was very clear that, a regulator does not think about the size of the blockchain market. That's not his job. So if you're sitting at State Bank, your job is not to think about how to improve Pakistan's inflows of dollars. Your job is not to think about what's the biggest technology thing which is coming up. Your job is very specific. Your job is managing the exchange rate. So you would only and then not allowing AML and KYC issues. So because your task is very specific, even if you tell them that you can create an Apple over here, they'll say that's not our job. We don't care, that we are not getting paid for that. So which means that, so that's why, when you started off saying, and I've seen state banks give the comment that we have not banned crypto. We have only said that you cannot put money in it using a bank account, and companies cannot take money outside.
Yeah, they just make it really hard for you to use it. So.
Yeah, no, we don't care about, it's not our job to think about, how big blockchain would be or how much jobs which it will create. So the problem is there needs to be an overarching coordination, but that overarching coordination is not there even in traditional finance. So as I'm a part of, I'm a consultant for Asian Development Bank, and as a part of that project, they are trying to set up a coordinating committee between State Bank and SECP and Ministry of Finance. And even it's not a trivial task. So to make them understand even the lingo of crypto, incentivize them to understand the significance of the benefit from job creation and dollar inflows, and it's so difficult that I'm not really hopeful about it. The only way forward which they might accept is what Umar said, which is that you have to give them assurance that this crypto will be generated domestically, it will not be purchased, and it will be treated as commodities. So there's already a regulatory framework for commodity futures, and then you have to create walled gardens that people won't be able to easily transfer money out. And I worry that after this regulation, like the restrictions, how many people will actually go in that walled garden. So hence, I actually think that if the best case scenario for Pakistan is if the regulators does not attend this webinar, if the regulator does not engage with it and stay outside. And then I'm sure that not many people on this call would know that technically all the gold which is sold in Pakistan, and there are gold markets everywhere in every city, we all have gold, like all our moms and sisters have gold. It's all illegal. It's all illegal. There is no legal gold because you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to import gold. So I'm happy with the no regulation scenario.
So no regulation from Ali. Omar, what do you think?
So just a couple of things. I guess the first thing I'd say is, as they say, you can only ban your country from crypto. You can't really ban crypto from your country. I mean, and China's experienced that. Like, I think it's the 7th ban in crypto in China.
Yeah, and Binance
just
said that's something in Cayman, right? So.
Absolutely. So I think it really, and I think Salahuddin has also echoed these views. Really, you can't stop it. It's something that's happening, and you can only decide to whether be part of it or be left behind. On the topic of the question that Salahuddin previously answered, I think I just add to that in terms of, obviously, it's not really a question. I completely agree with that thought process, but just to answer that question more concretely, I'd say. Crypto or Bitcoin in particular, for example, is actually more traceable, way more traceable than cash. Exactly. So if you were to ban crypto because you can send money to someone and not really trace it, and people tend to think, because people don't really realize the difference between anonymous and pseudonymous. And Bitcoin is not an anonymous network; it's a pseudonymous network, which means that there is a name. I might be called George or 0x123 on the network, but I've got a name, and that name is continuously sending to someone else, and so that name can be tracked. So in the sense of how traceable this money is, it's extremely traceable. This is how chain analysis works, and tons of companies are coming up. They're following the flows of crypto assets and so on and so forth. So I think it's a very well understood thing among the crypto specialists that it's actually way better sort of documented how the flows work compared to cash. And same point about energy consumption. The total energy consumption of Bitcoin right now is less than the total energy that refrigerators in the world consume today.
Yeah. So like, if you were to think it's a carbon issue, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think all of those things are kind of, those are generally processes which don't have enough thinking behind it. And I'd say just one final topic on the regulation. I think, and funny that we're talking about crypto, and the entire movement is based on the game theoretic economic incentivization of miners to secure a blockchain, which is a ledger. I think incentivization is one of the biggest things. So in regulation, I would say one of the biggest things will happen when the regulators have an incentive to regulate this well and make this into something. And how that would happen, in my view, is some level of government adoption of crypto. And people will have various views, all the way from central bank digital currencies to holding Bitcoin as a reserve asset. I think tons of work and research needs to be done within policy circles, particularly in developing countries, to understand how this would pan out. But I really think that the regulation would happen. I know this because I know this on a personal basis. So till I started using DeFi myself on my personal account on a simple wallet, I had no idea how to do this. I read about it for 6 months and never touched anything and didn't learn anything. And when I started deploying assets myself, even small amounts initially, you tend to understand, you get a lot more comfortable. Right. It's sort of learning by doing. And I think regulators, or not necessarily just regulators, but governments need to learn by doing. And I think once that starts happening, regulation will follow and people will understand and have an incentive to actually regulate it in a nice way.
Great. We actually have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to start getting through as many of the questions as possible. So I may just get one of you to answer things, just so there's just a lot of great questions in here. But actually, to the point of what we're all making about the regulators, to Ali's point, I hope the regulators aren't listening, right? Someone actually wrote, instead of looking at it as a top-down approach and waiting for the regulators to legalize it, why can't we just start building and let regulators find their way through? Which I think is really interesting when we look at India, right? We had unicorns that are in the crypto exchange space that existed in spite of the Indian regulators, not because of it. So do you guys, let me throw it to Ali then for this answer. Do you think that that's the way forward?
Absolutely. And I think crypto has been, it was and has been a mass movement of the common man. It never came from the top up. So it's not that large institutions set it up and then people adopted it. So I think A, that's the essence of it. B, generally from a Pakistani economy context, we know that unregulated sectors account for 90% or like a dominant size of the economy. So we know that wherever regulation comes in, that actually ends up shrinking the sector by creating barriers to entry. So why stop it?
And then to this point, Shabazz in the audience, the KPK government took an initiative for crypto mining earlier this year, as we were discussing about mining and all of that. Could this be the way forward? Focused provincial rollout, prove by creating value, and then inspire national adoption. Who wants to take that?
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I'm not a big mining fan itself. I don't think Pakistan's known for creating power at economic rates. It's a great way to experiment. I'm totally there with Umar, where you constantly run small experiments at a small experimental phase. KPK love what they're doing. I love the progressive perspective on KPK. I think there's an opportunity, an advocacy opportunity waiting to happen with KPK, where they start this adoption at other levels, right? Beyond mining, right? We were, as an example, talking to the GIK University and saying, hey, do you create your own coin? And you facilitate the commerce within campus, the photocopier, right? The samosa wala and all of those stuff, right? How do you just do it all electronically, right? So I think there's some interesting opportunities there. But the regulator, I think the incentive point Omar was making was a good one also. When humans are incentivized, mountains get moved, right? And so I think, again, going back to the point that if the PTI government people are listening, the incentive there is, FX. You can create these crazy opportunities and FX is going to flow. Look at what happened with El Salvador, right? And then the regulators are going to be incentivized because the government's going to be on top of them. But you got to do it smartly. Otherwise, you're going to create the challenges that Ali's talking about.
And actually, the point that you made, Salahuddin, about GIK and things that are happening on university campuses, that actually speaks to what I would love for one of you, two of you to dive into is what is the way to go for building an ecosystem for blockchain in Pakistan, right? We know about GIK. Obviously, Manib has donated to create like a center at LUMS right now. What are the things that need to be in place? So it goes beyond just like, obviously, crypto is, again, just scratching the surface. We need to create an ecosystem that can support the growth of this space. And so I would love one of you to take this, like what's needed for a blockchain ecosystem to be built up and what's already happening. Omar, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I think the most important thing is to remove the stigma. I think there's nothing more important than removing the stigma from blockchain, crypto. As they say, if you secretly despise wealth, it's never going to come to you. So you need to honor those entrepreneurs or the people who are basically thinking about this stuff at this point very early on and are doing things which are new. I think that's just in my view, whether it's on university campuses or in young entrepreneurs, little startups. I think it needs to happen that the government needs to take away the stigma from crypto and blockchain ecosystems in Pakistan.
Great. Any other things to add in terms of what's needed for an ecosystem? Go ahead, Ali.
I'll just follow up on what Omar said, that I think on the grassroots level, there's already a lot of strong adoption and the movement is really, really strong. Pakistani developers are learning about various blockchain platforms and, earning money, and this yield to game yield guilds is, I think will be very popular. The stigma only exists in the regulatory framework, in the regulatory ecosystem. And that's why, and changing that, I feel would be very difficult just because they will ask, those questions in terms of, how to regulate it, money laundering, all that stuff. So when I come to Pakistan and meet people, it's like two parallel worlds. You go to the regulator, they're so paranoid that their questions don't ever go to the positive side. While if you stay outside of the regulatory ecosystem, you go in the tech world, it's so positive and nobody really asks these questions. So better to stay over there than to dabble between the two.
Great. We're at time. So what I want to do to kind of wrap us up is each of the panelists take 30 seconds And the first, actually, Adam, who's a friend in the audience, asked a really great question, which is, do the panelists believe that cryptocurrencies will one day replace all currencies across the globe? So in the 30 seconds that you guys have to kind of close us out is, number one, what is your future vision of where cryptocurrency is going to go in the future? This is a really hard question, I know, for me to have you guys end with, but leave us on a note of like, where are we going? What's the vision? And the last thing, the second part of the 30 seconds, so 15 seconds and 15 seconds, is what would be the one piece of advice if someone's just getting into this world? What would be your piece of advice of how to begin their learning? So let's start with Omar, and then we'll go Ali and then Salahuddin to close us out.
Sure. So first 15 seconds, I think the biggest thing that crypto has done is ownership, is digital ownership, and it's way beyond currencies, it's way beyond assets and any single thing. So I think, it can take a whole while to expand on that, but I think digital ownership has been sort of established. In terms of advice to people, I'd say, this is one of the best times in the recent past to be an entrepreneur, to be a founder, to be a builder in this space. Like there's tons of capital available for smart builders. So I would say get your hands dirty, properly get involved in the ecosystem, build out, and lots of capital will follow you.
Thanks. Ali?
So just continuing with what Omar said. So the first thing is, so I won't mention what he said already. The first thing is Bitcoin, I think, will become the primary store of value, so the digital gold, which it's already becoming. So you will see more and more institutions and even perhaps governments allocating their reserves to it. And all the other web platforms will be used for Web 3.0, so decentralized internet. So two shifts happening, one on the financial market side, and then secondly on the technology side. In terms of what to do, experiment. What Umar said earlier, just start by, the best way to learn is by start doing it. So learn by doing.
Awesome. Salahuddin, close us out.
So here's my vision, right? Like basically the world's a pie and the growth experiments kind of slowed down a little, right? Over the last 5-10 years. So what's going to happen is you're going to build virtually, and currency is just one dimension. Metaverse, DAOs, communities. There's going to be multiple dimensions, and the pie is going to go up this way, and it's going to go up like 5x, 10x, 20x, right? And it's going to be way beyond currency, by the way. So people need to get over that. It's not just currency. There's another 20 things, 100 things that are going to happen in that. That's the vision side. In terms of what to take advantage, the theme that we've talked about a few times here, experiment and testing, right? There's a Chinese proverb, right? The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. Take whatever is minuscule to you, $50, $100, $500, rupees or dollars, it doesn't matter, right? Buy a little bit of Bitcoin. Where the money goes, the mind goes, right? So just start experimenting. And by the way, Bitcoin's down 6%, buy the dip.
Yeah, buy the dip. That's actually been, and as my piece of advice as someone who's the noob in the room on this panel, on this space, is number one, find really smart friends like Salahuddin who answer questions for you all the time. Number two is just get an account and just buy stuff, right? And I've used like small amounts of money, then I've just increased it over time. I'm constantly learning. And so consider it that all of us are new to this space. For the most part, it's still very much early adopters in this space. So consider yourself not stupid for asking questions, and good luck to all of you on the journey. But also, as we close out this panel, thank you very much to the Atlantic Council, to Uzair, for bringing everybody together for this. We are over time. And thank you to our panelists for offering such amazing insights. I've learned so much today, and I'm really excited about what the potential is in Pakistan as well as globally. So thank you, everyone.
Sweet, thanks.